Hi everyone, welcome to my testimony. Brittany went first and then Audrey, and now it's my turn. I've told my testimony many times, but it's different saying it to a phone in a room by myself. I don't have a whole lot of time to explain a 40 years worth of bad choices, good choices, happiness, mistakes, and everything in between. So we're just gonna go through the biggest parts of it. So when I was a kid, I got picked on a lot by the kids in school. I never fit in. But my home life was great. My mom was a wonderful mother. My father was a wonderful father. They did everything they could to make my childhood wonderful. I have 6 siblings, but I was raised as an only child because my brothers and sisters are quite a bit older than me. So it was like being an only kid. I had everything I could have wanted, and that I don't mean materialistically. I mean like my parents loved me, and it was great. It was a wonderful home life. So school was terrifying. It was awful. But I always had that wonderful home to go to, and that made a difference. I know a lot of people go through traumatic stuff when they're children, and it creates issues where they will become an addict, and I don't believe my parents were the cause of that. When I was about 13 or so, I found out my dad had developed a heroin addiction, and I had already started dabbling with drugs and sex before that. So that wasn't the cause of my bad decisions. But I do believe that what I watched and witnessed my father go through and what he put our family through my teenage years it kept me away from opiates for the party time of my life. In high school, I was the party girl. You saw me at every party. I was the one who was doing drugs and life of the party, making everybody laugh, walking around with a beer in my hand, even though I wasn't really drinking it because I wasn't a drinker. I enjoyed the drugs. I was always able to put stuff down. It never turned into an addiction or a habit in the sense of what I understand it to be now. It was just partying. We all did it. We were all together. Not all of us turned out to be addicts, but those choices, everybody's different. So it's just best not to pick it up at all, because you never know which direction picking up the drug that one time is going to take you. My father passed away when I was 17 years old. I hated heroin, and I hated anything that resembled it. I wouldn't speak to anybody who took that stuff. I was very judgmental on it, although I was doing other drugs. I knew it ruined my life. The man that I watched slowly kill himself for those last 4 years was not the father that raised me. He wasn't the same man. I don't refer to that man as the man that was such a good father to me. That man was somebody different, and I knew, and I witnessed it, that it wasn't him, it was the drugs that made him that way. So that was very hard. I unfortunately, though, being a teenager when my father died, instead of making proper decisions and turning to my mother and helping her through things, I turned to more drugs and partying, and I just wanted to numb myself. And I think that was the beginning of me choosing to do things like drugs to ease my pain. That was the first that's my first memory of choosing to self-harm, I guess, to make things better, so I thought. My mom then wound up selling our land and moving to Tennessee, and I refused to go with her because I grew up in Wisconsin. I knew everybody. My friends were there. I just started dating someone, and we loved each other, and I didn't want to go anywhere. So I stayed and she left. And I moved in with my boyfriend, and it wasn't within about a year or so we got pregnant, and I was pregnant with my daughter. And so when I got pregnant with my daughter, I put everything down. I stopped everything. I remember sitting, not at parties, but I mean, I did go to a party or two with my daughter's father and watch everybody else drink and stuff. But I remember sitting around watching people do drugs and stuff. I remember wanting to, but I wouldn't touch anything. I was really good. It changed my life. My daughter saved me from that. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that she saved my life and I just remained a good mother, but I eventually made horrible decisions and chose things above her. When she was about, I guess when I was still pregnant with her, her father cheated on me, and that set this thing in my mind. It broke me down in a sense that I can't explain. I was able to forgive him, but I was never able to trust him again. So we split up, and then once we split up, it was within a year. I moved to Tennessee. I decided to leave the state. I decided I didn't have anything left there. So I took my daughter, and we moved to Tennessee, and it was great. She was almost 3 years old, and it was wonderful. I didn't know anybody, and I loved it and hated it all at the same time. I was a very social person, but it was just me and her, my mom, and we had a blast together. She would go back and forth between Wisconsin and Tennessee. She'd spend like 6 months with me and like 6 months with her dad, and she'd just go back and forth and back and forth. And it started out like I never did anything with my kid around. I loved my daughter. I didn't want to be that, I never wanted to be like my father in that sense. So I wouldn't drink or go out or do anything when she was home. But when she wasn't home, I was at the bars and partying it up. And so it wasn't too long before drugs started to enter in. And eventually I got introduced to pain pills. It was a slow process into it because I was still pretty judgmental on it because of my father. But, that changed. That changed faster than I'd like to admit, actually. It wasn't too long before I was doing pills with my daughter, but she was asleep, and I justified it like that. She was in bed, and I only did it on the weekends. And then the weekends turned into, the weeknights as well. But she was in bed, so it was okay. And then it went from then to the weekdays, the morning when I woke up, and it just escalated until I was sick. I used to say people who get addicted to this stuff are dumb, because I would quit before I ever got to that point. But you know what? It's not how it works. It's not how it works at all. One day you just wake up and you need your fix to even function. It's not even about getting high. It's about, I need this to get out of bed. I need this to take a shower. I need this to go to work. I need this to get up and do anything. Like, I can't function. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I can't talk on the phone. I can't be a person without the drug that I am addicted to. So I did pills for years. I was a functioning addict. I worked and I paid my bills. I did everything I needed to do, and I took care of my habit. And I did that for years. And then, although I had been afraid of needles my entire life, and although I watched what happened to my father, somehow or another, in a moment of real of withdrawal, the only option that was available to me was IVing something, and I had turned it down, and I was sick, and I finally gave in, and I did that, and then that set me on something else, because IV drug use is another addiction. You become addicted to that form of using. It wasn't long before I was IVing everything. And when I say that, I mean that in the sense of it wasn't long before I lost my job. I burned my bridges. And I met a guy who taught me what it was like to be a junkie. He had just gotten out of prison, and he showed me what it was like how to hustle and how to do what you've got to do when you don't have a job. And he was into crack, and he introduced me to that. So it wasn't long before now I had this issue of crack and heroin, and I started losing a lot of weight really fast, and I got really, really skinny. I followed him around as he lied, cheated, robbed, and I justified a lot of things to myself by saying, like, I'm not the one doing them, but I benefited from everything he did, and I lied for him whenever he needed me to. It was a tumultuous relationship of arguing and him stealing my money, even though I barely made any money. Just going through it. And we went from, we slowly went from apartment to efficiency to hotel rooms. Jumping hotel room to hotel room to hotel room, spending every dime we had on drugs and hotel rooms, drugs and hotel rooms, drugs and hotel rooms. There was finally, it came to a point, my family, I had been running from my family for a very long time. I would randomly call my daughter, but it wasn't, I hadn't seen her in years and years. I went from being a good mother to just completely deserting her and her not understanding why. And it wasn't like I could tell her anything. I couldn't tell anybody anything. I hid it really well when I was hiding it really well. And then when I wasn't able to hide it really well anymore, it disappeared. I ran away from everybody because I didn't want them to be disappointed in me. I didn't want them to see what I was becoming and allowing myself to become. So I just stayed away completely. And then I would call occasionally, very occasionally. My mom would blow my phone up, but I wouldn't answer. But I had been speaking to my mom lately, and then when we ran out of money to stay in another hotel because we had to spend it on dope, I needed a place to go. My mom, for the first time, said, well, why don't you come here? My mom was always really big about, you move out, you take care of yourself. I taught you to be independent, you go be independent. That was it. If I told my mom I needed help, I was homeless, sleeping under the bridge, my mom would tell me, oh, honey, well, that's terrible. Are you hungry? I can feed you, but then you gotta go. So that's it. I never robbed my family. I didn't lie to them. I stayed away. If my mother ever asked me something, I had to tell her the truth. So it was easier to stay away from her than to let her ask me any questions. So I went to stay with my mom, and I remember going into the kitchen and hearing her on the phone with people, and I could hear her being like, well, she's eating. She's really skinny, but she's been eating all the time, so that's really good. Yeah, I know something's going on, stuff like that. And I remember just thinking, man, I don't want to say I felt judged, but I was like, dang, Mom. But I remember the day that I went outside to smoke, and I came in and she stopped me and she said, I have a question for you. And I was like, what's that? And she asked me, are you doing anything like your dad was doing? And that was it. I had to tell her the truth. So I told her the truth, and she took away every excuse that I ever had. I have a dog, I can't go to rehab. I can't do this, I've got this job, I have this, I have that, I have blah, 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 blah. All the reasons I ever gave myself, she said, well, I can do this for you, and I can help you with this, and I just want you to get help. So we sat down and we talked, and I told her I want to change. I want help. So I started to look at different outlets on how to get into rehab without money, because that's a difficult one. No insurance, no money means no help. At least that's the way that I thought. And in some cases, it still is that way. So the next day I saw my boyfriend. I told him that I wanted to go to rehab and I wanted to change, and he freaked out, telling me that I can't do that. I can't leave him like that. I can't blah, blah, blah. But I said, that's what I'm going to do. And so we split, and I did what I could. I told myself I was going to cold turkey it. I tried to do that. It did not work out. It was awful. I wound up having to go out and find something, and I ran into somebody that I thought I knew while I was out looking for different other drugs that might be able to ease my pain in the withdrawal from the heroin. So I was out there doing that, and I ran into somebody that I thought I knew. I thought I knew very well. I'd known him for years, and he was a good friend of my nephew's. And he offered me a place to sweat it out. Told me he wasn't even into those kind of drugs, so I could just go there, and he'd lock me up in a room and wouldn't let me out, like, you can come in and you can sweat it out. Everything will be cool. You won't, no temptation. So after some convincing, I decided to do that. And I went ahead and I went with him. And it was the mark of living hell for me for the next 4 years. I went to that house, and the first few days I was sick. I was doing it. And then he introduced me to meth. And at first it made me feel a little bit better, and then it stopped making me feel better. And so then he gave me Suboxone, which I didn't want to be on Suboxone. I'd been using it the wrong way for years, and I knew that I wasn't going to get sober that way. But I was wrong about that person. He spent the next 4 years beating me mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. He tore me down. He locked me in a room, and he kept me there. And if I talked back or didn't do as I was told, he would beat me. He used drugs as a means of abuse and control. He controlled when I was sick. He controlled when I was well. And the only way that I can say this, and it may or may not make sense to you, is that it's a whole nother form of torture to have somebody come in a room and get high in front of you when you are sick, and then tell you that if you were a good girl, that he'll make sure you get well. And then when you're a bad girl, the threat of you're going to be sick for days now, and it's your fault because you earned that, and then to get beat for it. He used to strip me down and drag me outside in my underwear and put me outside and lock the door and tell me that it was my punishment. And I would sit there until he thought it was okay for me to come in. And we were on the east side of Knoxville, so I wasn't going to run anywhere in my underwear at 4 a.m. It's another mistake I made. I thought that, I used to think that if a woman was in an abusive relationship, that she was stupid for not leaving. I did not know that your brain learns to function differently, especially in survival. I went from fighting back to trying to do and say whatever I could to not get harmed. I spent a lot of time analyzing situations to make sure to say the right thing, to do the right thing. It got to the point where he didn't have to tell me, he didn't have to make me take my clothes off and drag me outside. If he just pointed to the door and told me to get outside, I automatically stripped and went out there. And then it got to the point where he didn't make me get naked anymore. He would just get outside. And he didn't even lock the door anymore. I just knew better. I knew I was just going to get completely, I knew he was going to beat me. Gosh, it was traumatic and horrifying, and I don't wish that on my worst enemy. I pray for him on a regular basis. I would love to say I have completely forgiven him, but the Lord is still working with me on that. A lot of things were done in that amount of time, and I don't have the time to go through them all. One of the big things is, though, in the process of all of this, I got pregnant with a little boy, and he never took me to the hospital. I used the whole time I was pregnant. The day that I went into labor, he finally put me in the car and he took me to the hospital. I had this selfish thing in my head where I thought that child was going to save my life, that I was going to be able to get housing and protection from him and all these things, that the state would reach out and help me because I have this baby, right? So I go to the hospital and I couldn't even open my mouth to say that he was harming me. Like, even when I was alone, I was always so afraid he was going to find out, because he used to beat me for my thoughts. He would tell me what I was thinking, and if I told him that I wasn't thinking those thoughts, I never thought those thoughts. I didn't think that at all. He would beat me for it, and make me tell him that is what I was thinking, and it was hard. Like, I was scared to death of this boy who was controlling me. Don't even know. I don't understand how I was a strong-willed girl and I wound up there. I don't even understand. But in the hospital, I remember getting on my knees and praying that they wouldn't take my child. But my child was born addicted to drugs, and they thought he was born a month early, but I don't even know. I never went to the hospital. I don't know when I was due, technically. And so then they started to talk about, well, it seems like he's actually, to full term, just really small. He was born at 4 pounds. So there was no telling, and I wouldn't open my mouth. Needless to say, I lost that child. I lost him. And instead of fighting so hard for him, I gave up even more. Life got bad, but let me tell you, I remember being on my knees and praying to God for help when that man was beating me, when that man was torturing me, when that man was using me, when that man was making me feel like I was something that was put on this earth for him. I was begging God for help. And I was begging him, please. And I was begging him to let me keep my baby and my baby to be healthy and safe. And let me tell you that God is so good. Because even though I had to go through that, I went through those things for a reason. And God still came out on the other side. And he's shown me where he was in those times. And, we ended up losing the house that we were living in because the whole COVID thing happened, and he didn't pay any of the bills. There was a drug dealer in town that had been buying everything from us because he was stripping the house down and selling everything. And it was a female, and she said, if you guys need a place to stay, if you're about to get out of here, you guys can come stay with me. I have a room you can stay in for free. So we went there. It turns out it wasn't a room. It was a crawl space under the house, and you had to get down on your hands and knees and crawl in, and there was this little tunnel, and then it opened up to just a little place where you could sleep. There was no heat, no light, no air, no water, no bathrooms, nothing of the sort. I remember when we were living in the house and he wouldn't let me leave the room, he would give me jugs to pee in. I wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom. So I used to, in my mind, I told myself that this was just practice. You know, I got practice for living in this crawl space with no bathroom for the last few years. So that was no big deal to me. I'd been peeing in jugs for a while. And although it was terrible, he stopped beating me so badly there because there were people around all the time, and he didn't want to let them know who he really was. So, but you know, that didn't stop him from harming me. So he would make sure that I didn't come out of that room. He kept me down there. I would come out occasionally, but he controlled how long I was out, and he'd never let me be alone. And in the case that I ever was alone, and he would freak out whenever he was around me and accuse me of all sorts of things, and then beat me, not as badly, but he'd beat me. Black eyes, broken noses, broken ribs, all the things I've ever had from him. And I remember one night, I was away from him for a second, so of course he accused me of all sorts of things. He was hitting me in the back of the head, and I started to yell, and so he didn't want the people in the house to hear, so he was trying to choke me. He had choked me so many times that I'd learned how to counter it. So I was countering it, and he was getting frustrated because he wasn't able to choke me out. And so he put his hand over my mouth and my nose, and he was holding it, and he was telling me to calm down, and that if I would calm down, he would let me go. And I wasn't calming down because I was suffocating. I don't even remember how long it went on for, and he finally let me go. And that's when I realized that he wasn't going to kill me on purpose. By this time, I'd realized he was a coward. Although I still didn't have the strength and wherewithal to leave, I knew he was a coward. And I knew right then and there that he wasn't going to kill me on purpose. He was going to kill me on accident. And I had that moment of like, this is how I'm going to die. This is how I'm going to die. He's going to kill me. It's going to be something like this situation. And then what? Like, this is it. Like, this is what my life has led to. And I remember just mentally, like, what if, like this, I can't even describe the feeling that I had. And I started praying again. And, but God, but God, he's, God is so good. Because right after that, the girl that ran the house, she told him he had to leave, and she gave me an option. She told me, you can either leave with him and perpetuate the cycle, or you can stay here and I will make sure that he never touches you again. But I'm not putting up with it anymore. So it's either you both leave or he's leaving. And I had to make a decision. And of course, I chose to stay, and she made him leave. She had him escorted out. And from that point on, she had a handful of guys, anywhere between 5 to 8 guys constantly around me or checking on me or something. And I wasn't alone. And she made sure that he could not harm me. He couldn't touch me. He wouldn't come back for me. And for the first time, I felt safe in a long time. And it wasn't even a month after that, because mind you, I was living in a crawl space under a trap house. I was heavily into doing drugs. I was very out there. It wasn't even a month after she made him leave that the DEA raided the house. And when the DEA raided that house, they pulled me out of that crawl space. And as one of them has made aware to me that I'd forgotten about it, it had rained a lot recently. So when it rained, the crawl space would flood. So I was sleeping in, like this much water. And they pulled me out of that little crawl space. And it was like 6 o'clock in the morning. And I came out and I asked if they were zip tying my wrists, and I asked if I could please just have my baby blanket, which is the blanket my grandmother made for me when I was a little kid. It's something that I managed to carry with me my whole life, that and my childhood teddy bear. I've never let them go. No matter what I've lost, I still have those. And one of the DEA agents started to cry, and he had to walk away. I found this out much later, but he had mentioned that someone very, very close to him is an addict as well. And when I said that, he saw a little girl. Mind you, I was like 87 pounds, soaking wet. They pulled me out of there. They zip tied me. I had no shoes on. I was dirty. I don't think I'd showered in 6 months or a year. I'm not even sure. I was small and feeble and helpless and broken. And they took me to the front of the house, and the other DEA agent started to interview me, and he said that he told me, I remember him looking at me and telling me that I didn't belong there, and he asked me if he could get me help, would I take it? And I said yes. And mind you, I did not want help at that point in time. I knew I was too far gone. Every day I woke up, I was praying that my next shot was going to be my last. I prayed to overdose. I prayed to die every day. I didn't want to live anymore. I was completely and wholly comfortable dying on the street. I just wanted it to be over. Like, I just wanted it to be over. I was so disgusted with myself and my life. I was ready for it to just be done. I'd lost everything and everyone. I hadn't spoken to my daughter in years. They didn't know if I was alive or dead anyway. It would have made no difference. My mother would have gotten over it eventually, you know, like I was very, very selfish in it. But I said yes that day, and he made a couple phone calls, and a couple ladies drove all the way out from Sevierville, and they put me in an Uber, and they paid for it and handed me $20. And I had my thought, you know, of course, as an addict, was like I could just go down the street and pick up a bag, but I didn't. I went through with it. I went to a 5-day detox. I went from that 5-day detox to a 28-day program. That 28-day program was the first time I was sober. And I remember walking around, and I remember feeling the wind and looking at the trees and looking at the individual leaves. And I was so blessed. And I started thanking God as I walked around outside. Like, it was the best feeling ever. It was something I never thought I was going to experience in my life. I thought I was going to die high. I thought that's it. Like, I thought for sure that was it. My cycle was high withdrawal, high withdrawal, high withdrawal, and death. That's it. That's all I got. And I was amazed, and I was so grateful, and it was amazing. And I really wish that I could say that I left that rehab and my life changed and everything was beautiful, but it's not what happened. I had started to reach out to God at that rehab. I got a Bible. I started to lead NA meetings, and we did Bible studies, you know, whatever, but we went over some things, and we talked about Jesus, we talked about God, we talked about our Savior. Did I really know him yet? Not really, but you know, it was this start. Like, my eyes opened, and I knew Jesus was in it. But I left that 28-day program, and I put myself in a situation, and that situation led to me overdosing. It was about 6 hours after I left rehab. I overdosed, and I was on the street for, I think it was about 27 days. And within that 27 days, I know I can count 8 times that I overdosed, but it may have been more than that. 8 times. In my entire time on the street, I'd overdosed twice. And somehow now I was overdosing almost every other day, it seemed like. 8 times in a 27-day span. I should be dead. I shouldn't be sitting here telling you this story right now, but I am. And that's another but God. The Lord was watching me intently. And he kept me. And one day I made a very bad decision, once again, following the same person. He made some bad choices and I was there. And so when that situation happened, I wound up being arrested. I went to jail and I ended up spending the next 3 months in a jail cell, well, an open pod in another state. I knew nobody. I had no phone numbers except for my mother's. So I had no money on my books. I had no one to call. I had no one to bail me out. I knew I was sitting there. I knew that's where I was going to be. And I stayed there. I stayed there for the whole 3 months. And in that 3 months, God revealed himself to me. And he let me know that he had brought me out of so much. And I kept choosing to turn around and go the other way. And he plucked me out and he set me down on firm ground where I could not choose anything different. And I started reading and praying, and I had this little book called God's Promises, and I read that book every day, and I highlighted verses and I memorized them, and I sat there, and I came to terms with the fact that I was going to be in jail, and it was okay, because that's where God placed me, and it was where I was going to get my head straight again. I spent 3 months there, and one day I get a phone call. And that phone call was telling me that I was going to get bailed out, but only if I would go to this year-long faith-based program in Morristown, Tennessee. And I agreed to do so. And they paid for it. And they picked me up and they drove me to Morristown, and I enrolled in a faith-based long-term program, and it changed my entire life. That is where I was able to sit still, and that was where I was able to study my Bible, and godly people surrounded me. I formed some of the best friendships I've ever made in my life. The Lord revealed himself to me in a way that still puts me in awe to this day. I was introduced to my husband in this. He went to a program called Renovatus, and God just kept making sure we crossed paths over the years. I was able to meet my son, who's been adopted, and he's healthy and he's happy and he's beautiful. My daughter has forgiven me. She's wonderful. God has restored my relationship with my mother, my daughter, my family, people who thought I was dead. I wound up working for that program for about 2 years after, living in the house with the ladies, and just being a role model and a guiding light, and being there when things were hard and when things were easy and when things were everything in between. Guiding them to the Lord and letting them know that they were loved and are loved. The Lord has completely changed my life from what I was to what I became. This unrecognizable lump of clay, right? And then the Lord breathed life into me, and I have never been the same. I am so grateful for everything that he has done for me, and he continues to do. I am so blessed, and now it is my duty to share that. It's my duty to share him. It's my duty to let people know, like, I should be dead, and God let me know I have a future, and so do you, Everybody does. I was so hopeless and lost. I really didn't believe there was a way out. And most people that I spoke to, other addicts, would tell me there wasn't a way out except for death. And that was it. God plucked me out of the mire. He picked me up. He tilted my head up to him. He told me he loves me. And now I have to spread that love. My life has completely changed. There's so much more to my testimony, but I am beyond out of time. So thank you for listening. God bless you. You are loved.